Hello and welcome back to the Health and Functioning in Late Life podcast. My name is Katie Kyle and I am a nursing student at the College of St. Scholastica. With me today I have Daryl Kyle, who is a spiritual care coordinator at Essentia Health Home Hospice. Today our sources are hopehealthcode.org, the Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care, the National Library of Medicine, the PMC NCBI.gov, and mariecurie.org.uk. And then, of course, the gerontology course, Health and Functioning in Late Life at the College of St. Scholastica. So can you introduce yourself a little bit and let us know what you're about?
My name is Daryl Kyle. I am a spiritual care coordinator or chaplain with Essentia St. Mary's Hospice. I have been engaged in this work for the last 4.5 years. Prior to that, I pastored Lutheran congregations for 25 years. And I find that those two disciplines really do work hand in hand when working with and dealing with people at end of life.
Okay, so the Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care defines spiritual care as the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, the way their experience, the connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and or to the significant or the sacred. How would you define spiritual care in hospice?
I think hospice care, just generally speaking, is concerned with care for the entire person. Mm-hmm. And I believe that every person is comprised of no less than 3 parts. We are all physical beings. So we deal with physical symptoms and medical care. We are also emotional beings. So we have feelings. We have regrets sometimes, we have joys, sorrows, and everything that comprises life. But I also believe that we are spiritual beings that have a need to be connected to something greater than ourselves. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean an affiliation with a religious group, but rather it's the search and quest for meaning that transcends life in general.
According to some of my sources, it was talking about how spiritual care is seen as the relief of suffering through hospice. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's twofold. I think it can be relief of suffering, but I also think that it's walking with in the midst of suffering. So not all of our patients end their life in a place of peace. Mm-hmm. But part of what spiritual care does is walks alongside during this final journey in order that we know that we don't do this alone. So we walk with in the midst of suffering. And if some relief of that suffering comes, then all the better. And sometimes we do see that, but sometimes we don't. So I think it's all about the journey.
Okay. So you talked about how religion and spirituality and necessarily how that can be different and how you don't have patients who are affiliated with a religious association. So there is a quote from Dennis Lynch, who is a Hope Health Hospice chaplain, who said, "We don't bring religion. We honor where people are and we just show up as an open book." How do you incorporate that in your day-to-day?
I think that that's absolutely true. So you have to understand that as human beings, whether we're in spiritual care or nursing or whatever discipline it is that we happen to work in, you have to understand that you bring yourself into the midst of these conversations and these visits. But the point of the care that chaplains or spiritual care coordinators bring in the midst of hospice isn't me coming in with an agenda. I'm a Lutheran Christian. That is who I am. But most of my patients are not Lutheran Christians. Mm-hmm. So my job is not to go out and make more Lutherans in this work. My job, my goal, my mission really, is to meet people where they're at. And I think a lot of the time what you'll discover is that people will talk about what it is they want to talk about. And I like the idea that Lynch says that we're in an open book. Because what happens then is that our patients and their families are able to write on those pages. And as a consequence, when they write on those pages, they're doing their spiritual work in order to bring some of that relief from suffering.
Yeah, so it's also been said that hospice spiritual care is helping patients and the family be seen. So how do you incorporate the family into that as well?
Every single human being is connected or disconnected with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we deal with individuals, we're also dealing with systems. So every family is a system, and it functions the way that it functions, but it also dysfunctions the way that it dysfunctions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we walk into those situations, you have to understand that the patient is not an island unto him or herself, but rather they're a part of something, whether it's a family unit or work relationships. We have patients every now and again that really are disconnected from any family at all. Where do they find their visible means of support? Or, by the same token, where are those places in their lives that produce suffering or anxiety? So I don't think that you can meet an individual in an isolated environment. It's never just about the patient. It's about the patient and their relationships. And so we have some families that are very, very involved. I had one patient at one point in time that I don't think I ever saw by herself, because one of her family members was always present. Well, so what does that say about the way that the family dynamic works, and how does that patient function in the midst of that larger unit? So when we talk about dealing with a whole person,
Yeah.
we deal with not only that person, but also their primary and secondary relationships, and sometimes, especially where those relationships are broken.
It's really interesting. So you talked about how you're a Lutheran pastor. You have over 20 years experience in the parish.
I do.
And I grew up the same way. But
You did.
I did grow up. This is my father, if that was not clear. How do you, so you talked about how you have patients who are not necessarily in the Lutheran faith, and you have to go in being that open book and having that open frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you walk that line of not being the Lutheran pastor that you have been for 20 years versus being that open book and having that way to cater yourself to that individual to give them what they need at this very large point in their life?
So part of that is that I have to be true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've also worked as a military chaplain for 19 years, and that's a very pluralistic environment as well, just as healthcare is. And so most people's idea of a military chaplain comes from a TV show back in the 70s and 80s called MASH.
Yep.
And they had a chaplain that was a regular presence in that show. His name was Father Mulcahy. And Father Mulcahy was a Catholic priest, and he would say things like, "It's okay, I can do Jewish." Well, the truth of the matter is, I can't. So one of the things that I do with patients of different religious groups is try and make a connection for them with a faith leader of their own community. We have a large number of Catholic patients in our population with hospice, simply because this area of the world has a very large Catholic population. So I have developed a relationship with local priests that I can call them and say, "Hey, I have a Catholic patient who needs sacramental care," and they come, which is really a gift, both to me and the patient. So I guess to boil it down, I have to start out with, you have to have a very solid sense of yourself. I have to know who I am when I walk into these interactions. I also have to know who I'm not. But it's also really helpful to be able to connect patients with religious folks from their own background. The other part of that too is, as I said before, it is not my calling in this particular profession to make everybody a Lutheran. What my calling is to meet people where they're at. So rather than sharing my religious beliefs, I'm anxious to hear about theirs. And if they have none at all, what I'm anxious to hear about is where they find meaning and transcendence in the midst of their journey. So it's understanding who I am, who I'm not, but also being wise enough to let my patients and their families tell me where they are and what they need. And that's a great learning experience both for them and for me.
So you talked about finding, learning what their meaning and their transcendence is.
Yeah.
That is obviously a very heavy topic for people at no matter what point of life they are in.
It is.
And it can be hard to talk about. So how do you build those relationships and get to the point where they're able to talk about their meaning and their transcendence?
That is a great question. I am in the relationship business. That's what I do. So in order to build a relationship, one of the things you have to do is you have to build trust.
Yes.
So when I walk into a room for the first time, my goal is for the patient to tell me about them, because I want to hear who they are, what they have to say, what's important to them. And that becomes incredibly important going forward, because I think that one of the things that people in our society in this day and age want more than anything else is simply to be heard. And if that door is open, then it can lead to other things. I'll tell you just a brief story. I'm a military veteran, and that provides me entree with a lot of military veterans that might not otherwise want to speak to a spiritual care coordinator. So I had a military veteran who wasn't interested in seeing a spiritual care coordinator until he was told that I'm a vet. So one of the things that you do is you find those connections, because we have commonality with people we meet every day. It's just a matter of finding out where those commonalities exist. And how do you do that? By listening.
That is something that you taught me very, very much growing up. And I can see that when I'm caring for patients through my work as well. Sometimes just finding out that I'm a military kid has helped a lot, and then they're more willing to let me help them and being able to lend a helping hand. So I think that is something that's very, very important that's not necessarily talked about, because everybody's looking at their to-do list and trying to just go forward.
Right, but sometimes the only way to go forward is to stop for a minute and let your patients and their families lay out that path.
So how do you manage that to get your complete what you need to complete and make sure that each individual person feels needed and heard?
There are requirements in any visit. I do have a little bit more freedom than, say, someone in the nursing field as far as what I'm expected to do. I'll just give you another example. When we admit patients into hospice, within 5 days after admission, we need to complete a spiritual care assessment. So when I go into a patient's room for the very first time to complete that spiritual care assessment, I do come in with some questions that are already prepared. What's important to you? What gives you meaning? Does anything trouble you? But all of those questions are open-ended so that a patient and their family can fill in those gaps. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And there is always the risk of falling off into a ditch on one or the other side of the road. So part of that, quite frankly, is just being disciplined about what you do and understanding prior to a visit what the expectations are. So I think firm expectations are one thing, and I think also just knowing that sometimes things are not going to go according to plan is also important. So adaptability is a key for what anybody in healthcare does.
So you mentioned the spiritual intake form, basically.
Spiritual care assessment is called, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned like asking what's troubling them.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that a large part of your job is dealing with spiritual distress in a way?
Yes, I would. Because spiritual distress is a very real thing throughout our lives, but most especially at end of life. Because what people tend to do at end of life is they're trying to put life in order. They're trying to resolve things that are unresolved. Sometimes they're resolvable, sometimes they aren't. They're trying to order and find meaning in their journey in this life, no matter how long or how short it was. The other thing about that too, especially when we have younger hospice patients, we have parents who are also trying to make sense of, or not even make sense of, but figure out what the death of a child, whether it be an adult or a juvenile, what that means in the context of their life and their legacy. So it's all life is a spiritual struggle. It just is. And the fact of the matter is, when you come to end of life, those struggles intensify simply because time is short.
Yeah. So I have a list of things that they might be saying or showing that say that they're in more of a spiritual distress. So searching for meaning, which you have talked about, like why is this happening? Why me? Who am I?
Yep.
And how will I be remembered? So how they'll be remembered at the end of life.
Yes.
Becoming more withdrawn and isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanting to be by themselves, not wanting any company, not wanting any visitors, but they're also afraid of being alone. Refusing care, saying that they feel scared or worried, and feeling depressed and not at peace. So how overall do you go through that, and what can you do to help them, and how?
This may sound like a trite answer, but it is not. I'm not the one going through it. They're the ones going through it. I'm walking with them while they go through it. Mm-hmm. And every human being is an individual. And the way that we process spiritual distress or grief or triumph, for that matter, is different with different individuals. So I think that it's very, very important not to box people in to say this is what you'll be experiencing, but rather to say things like, tell me what you're experiencing. And for some of us, it's really, really important just to hear someone else say, yes, this is a normal or logical or reasonable experience. It's validation. If we're going to meet people where they are, then we have to be willing to sit with them where they are and to allow them the freedom to express themselves. Not necessarily to resolution, but once again, simply to be heard.
I think that's really interesting. So, you have experience as a parish pastor and a military chaplain. You're also a father.
Yeah.
With the parish pastor, you help with baptisms, you do weddings, you do funerals. With all of your experiences with not only being a hospice chaplain, but also parish, military, and being a father yourself, how do you think those contribute to how you have acted and how you have gone about things as a hospice chaplain, specifically?
A human being is the sum total of their experiences. So our lives have an impact on who we are and who we become. So one of the things that it enables me to do is find commonality with people. Another thing that it does is hopefully encourages me to try and see that we are complex human beings. And that different areas of our lives inform us in different ways at different times. So when I talk to a military veteran, let's say, then having an understanding of that experience can be incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If I meet somebody else who's a parent, I have some background in understanding what it's like to be a parent. If I'm talking to someone who is very, very connected to a religious body, whether it's Lutheran or even Christian or not, I can understand the importance of that to the individual. Now, how they practice it might be incredibly different, even inside the same church building or synagogue or mosque or whatever. But again, I think that having all of those different experiences really informs who we are and makes us a more complete human being. So for you, for example, going into nursing, having the background that you have as part of a family, as doing other jobs besides nursing, of having relationships with other people really does make you not only a more complete, but I hope a more empathetic person when you're dealing with someone else who has, in some ways, experiences that you can relate to. Maybe not understand, but at least relate to.
Okay, well, I wanted to thank you for being willing to do this with me today and being willing to talk about all of this. My one last question is, for those who like the hospice and palliative care and are hoping to go into it and working with this very specific population, what would be your one thing that you would want them to know?
Can I give you two?
Yeah.
Here's the first one. The first one is to understand what an incredible privilege it is to work with people at this point in their lives.
It is.
The second thing that I would tell you, and it doesn't matter if you're in hospice or palliative care or whatever discipline you happen to be in, you have to find a way to nurture your own soul in the midst of this incredibly difficult work. One of the ways I talk about it with some of my colleagues is that we carry around a backpack with people's emotions, with people's fears, with people's conditions. You have to find a way to set that backpack down sometimes, especially when you're not at work, because this work can be consuming, but you have to tend to your own care in the midst of working and caring for others.
Well, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And it means a lot to me that you're willing to do this.
My pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too.